The pool had been Marcus Chen's sanctuary for exactly 14 months, ever since the divorce was finalized and the house became his alone. He'd saved for 10 years to buy this place, this 3-bedroom Tudor with the wraparound deck and the Olympic-sized pool that had been the deciding factor the moment he walked through the gate. On hard days at work when contracts fell through or clients turned hostile, he thought about that pool. On weekends, he used it. Alone. Peaceful. That changed on a Tuesday afternoon in late June. Marcus was in his home office, halfway through a conference call with a vendor in Shanghai when he heard the gate click open. Not the gate to the front. The side gate. The one that led directly to the pool area. He paused the call, listened. Footsteps. Multiple footsteps. Voices, female voices, young and bright, the kind of voices that belonged to people who didn't live in his house. He ended the call with an apologetic excuse and walked to the back window. What he saw made him go still. 3 women, dressed in summery tank tops and shorts, were setting up camp by his pool like they'd just rented the place for a week. One was unrolling a towel across one of his loungers, the expensive ones he'd bought last month. Another was opening a cooler at the glass table. The third was already testing the water with one foot, laughing about how perfect the temperature was. They hadn't asked, hadn't knocked, hadn't apparently even considered that someone might own this property and object to their presence. Marcus went outside. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice clipped and professional, the same tone he used in board meetings. "This is a private residence." The women turned. The one closest to the pool was stunning in that effortless way that made Marcus immediately suspicious of his own judgment. She wore her confidence like a second skin. Oversized sunglasses pushed up onto her blonde hair. A diamond engagement ring caught the sun as she waved. "Oh, hey," she said, her smile radiant. "We're friends of the Hendersons. They said we could use the pool whenever we wanted this summer. They're still traveling, right? They mentioned their neighbor has a lovely setup." Marcus's stomach tightened. The Hendersons were 3 houses down. He'd met them exactly once when they'd come over to introduce themselves. They'd mentioned renting out their home for the summer while they worked abroad. That was 2 months ago. He had no idea if they'd actually done it. "This is my house," Marcus said carefully, "not the Hendersons." The blonde woman's smile didn't falter, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, maybe. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Sarah, the woman who gave us the code, she said to use the pool with the big oak tree. Is there not a pool at the Hendersons?" There was a pool at the Hendersons. A smaller one, but a pool. And there was, in fact, a large oak tree on Marcus's property. He wanted to believe it was an honest mistake. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said. "I'm going to need you to leave." The blonde woman glanced at her friends, then back at Marcus. Her expression shifted into something more calculated. "Of course, we're really sorry. Totally our mistake. Come on, girls." She gathered her things with theatrical efficiency, laughing about the mix-up, treating it like an amusing story she'd tell over drinks. As they packed up, Marcus found himself noticing things. The cooler they were using was high-end. Her shorts looked like they'd cost more than his shirts. The engagement ring wasn't just diamond. It was the kind of stone that required serious money. He stood by the gate until they left, until he heard their car start and pull away. Then he went inside and immediately called the Hendersons. It took 40 minutes to get through the phone tree of international calling, but eventually Sarah Henderson answered, sleepy-voiced from whatever time zone she was in. "Marcus, hi, how are the neighbors treating you?" "About that," he said. "Did you give anyone permission to use your pool?" A pause, no why. He explained. Sarah's voice sharpened with anger. She apologized profusely, mentioned something about a breach in their rental process, promised it wouldn't happen again. But she also mentioned that they couldn't monitor the property closely from abroad, and they'd been having issues with the rental company. Marcus hung up feeling uneasy. The women had seemed to accept his boundary. They'd left without much pushback. It should have been over. It wasn't over. He first noticed the car a week later. A white Range Rover parked on the street in front of his house. He watched from his office as the same 3 women came through the gate, using a code, he realized, which meant they'd either gotten it from the Hendersons' rental listing or found it somehow. He went out immediately. "You can't be here," he said flatly. The blonde woman, he still didn't know her name, turned to him with a look of serene patience, the kind someone might give a child who was being difficult. "I talked to the Hendersons yesterday," she said. They said we were fine to use it. It's part of the rental agreement they made with the property management company. The pool is considered communal. It's not, Marcus said. This is a separate property. This is my house. Have you talked to the Hendersons about it? She asked, her tone suggesting she found his concern almost quaint. Because they seemed very clear that. I talked to them last week. You aren't welcome here. The woman smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. That's surprising because they specifically told me this morning that there'd been a misunderstanding and were absolutely welcome. They were very apologetic about the confusion. She tilted her head, her tone turning almost pitying. Maybe you should call them again. Marcus felt a sharp spike of anger. He did call them again that night. Sarah sounded embarrassed. Apparently, their rental management company had contacted them about a negative review from guests who couldn't access the promised community amenities. The Hendersons, thousands of miles away and eager to maintain their rental income, had quickly assured the company that yes, the neighboring pool was available to guests. We didn't know, Sarah said weakly. We thought, it seemed like it might be okay. It's just a pool. It's my pool, Marcus said, on my property, which I paid for. I know, and I'm truly sorry, but we can't afford to get a bad review right now. Can't you maybe not use the pool when they're there? Or maybe they could come at certain times that don't interfere with. Marcus hung up. That was the moment his sanctuary started to feel less like a refuge and more like a crime scene he'd have to defend repeatedly. The confrontations became routine. Every few days, sometimes twice a week, the white Range Rover would appear. Marcus would go out. The blonde woman, he'd learned her name was Karen from her friends calling to her, would explain that she'd been promised access, that it was unfair he was trying to take that away, that she was friends with the Hendersons. Each conversation was a variation of the same manipulative dance. I completely understand, she'd say. This must be frustrating for you, but they literally invited us. They said it was fine. They're renting their home. They have no right to offer my pool. Is there really no way we could work something out? This in a tone that suggested he was being unreasonable, that any normal person would be flexible about someone using their property. Marcus began documenting everything. Dates, times, license plate numbers. He took screenshots of the Hendersons' rental listing, which indeed mentioned access to neighboring luxury amenities. He sent cease and desist emails to the rental management company. He looked into legal options and was told that building a case would be expensive, that small claims court might not even view pool usage as significant property infringement. The situation escalated in ways he hadn't anticipated. Karen began bringing more people. Her initial group of 2 expanded to 4, then 5. They'd come on weekends, arriving in multiple cars, and a quick glance from the window revealed parties, friends, family, people Marcus had never seen before, all treating his pool like it was a public facility. One afternoon in mid-July, he counted 16 people in his backyard. Children were running around the deck. Someone was using his grill, which he'd specifically brought inside the night before. He went out and found a man, mid-50s and red-faced from sun and beer, flipping burgers on that grill. That's my property, Marcus said, reaching for it. The man stepped back, spatula raised like a weapon. Whoa, buddy, Karen invited us, we're guests. Not in my house, not using my things, leave now. No need to be hostile, the man said, in that particular tone that made Marcus's blood pressure spike. It's just a few burgers, share the wealth, man. Marcus called the police. They came, a tired-looking officer and a younger woman with a notepad. They listened to his explanation, took a look at the group, who had by then rapidly packed up and were piling into their cars with theatrical politeness, waving goodbye to the officers like it had all been a hilarious misunderstanding. The officer turned to Marcus. Property dispute with neighbors, he said, and it wasn't a question. This the rental situation. Yes, they keep coming back. I've asked them to leave multiple times. They got papers saying they can be here. No, the rental company sent something that mentioned neighboring amenities, but... Right, so it's a civil matter. We can document that you've asked them to leave, but unless they trespass after you've filed a proper notice or they cause damage, this is going to be something you work out with your neighbor or through the courts. The officer handed him a card. Want me to talk to them about the documentation part? The officer did speak to Karen and the others. For a week, they didn't come back. Marcus almost dared to hope it was over. Then the second wave began. They came on a Saturday morning, and this time Karen didn't bother with the pretense of permission. She pulled up with her 3 original friends, unlocked the side gate with a code she apparently still had access to, and they set up with the confidence of people who decided they belonged there. When Marcus came out, she simply smiled and said, "Hi, neighbor, we're going to use the pool now." "You need to leave." "No, we don't." She sat down on one of his loungers, removing her cover-up with deliberate slowness. "You can call the police if you want, but they're going to tell you what they told you last time. It's going to take months and thousands of dollars for you to actually keep us out. Is it worth it to you?" The casual cruelty of it, the naked calculation, took his breath away. She'd already decided he was a nuisance she could outlast. She'd already weighed his property rights against her entitlement and decided she was willing to push harder. "Yes," Marcus said quietly, "it is worth it." He hired a lawyer the next Monday. The lawyer's name was Patricia Valdez, a compact woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen every variation of small-town property disputes and had zero patience for any of them. She listened to his story with her fingers steepled, asking occasional clarifying questions. "The rental listing," she said when he finished. "Does it explicitly state that non-renters can use your pool, or does it just say neighboring amenities?" "It's vague, but they're using it under false pretenses anyway. The Hendersons didn't actually have the right to offer my property to anyone." "No, they didn't, but proving that in court is going to be tedious. These things usually resolve in one of 2 ways. Either the property owner gets tired and gives up, or the trespassers realize the cost of continuing isn't worth it." Patricia leaned back. "We're going to file an official trespass notice. I'll have it served on the Hendersons' property management company. Then we document every instance of trespass after that. If she comes back after being formally notified, we can pursue charges. That might work." "How long?" "If she's smart, she'll stop once she realizes you're serious. If she's not," Patricia shrugged, "could take months." The trespass notice was filed on August 2nd. Marcus had it served to the property management company, sent copies to the Hendersons, and emailed it to Karen directly. In the notice, he documented every instance of unauthorized pool usage, every date, every incident. He included photographs. He was thorough and methodical, the way he approached business problems. For 4 days, nothing happened. On August 6th, Karen came back. This time she came alone. She pulled up in the morning, let herself in through the side gate, and began setting up as if the trespass notice didn't exist. Marcus watched from the window, his heart pounding. He pulled out his phone and called Patricia. "She's here again, after the notice." "Photograph or video her," Patricia said. "Date, time, everything. Then you can ask her to leave. Document that she's refusing to comply with the trespass notice." Marcus went out, phone in hand, camera open. Karen was floating on one of his loungers, earbuds in, completely ignoring him. He raised his voice. "You've been served notice. You're trespassing. I'm asking you to leave." She opened one eye, removed an earbud, and looked at him with an expression of profound boredom. "I'm going to swim for an hour. You're welcome to stand there and watch, or you can stop being dramatic and go back inside." "I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," she closed her eye again. "They'll tell you the same thing they told you last time." But he did call, and this time, because he'd documented a formal trespass notice, the situation was different. The same officer came back, looking annoyed. He explained to Karen that she'd been served notice and was now in violation of the statute. Karen sat up, suddenly all concerned reasonableness. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The homeowners across the street, the Hendersons, they actually gave me permission to use their pool amenities. This gentleman seems to have a personal dispute with them, but that's not my problem. I'm a guest of theirs." "Ma'am, it doesn't matter. This is his property, his pool on his property. Once a property owner has served notice and asked you to leave, you can't come back. Even if the actual renters of the adjacent property gave permission." The officer looked uncomfortable. "Well, that's a gray area, legally speaking." "It's not gray," Marcus said sharply. "Those property owners have no legal right to offer my pool to anyone." But watching Karen work the officer, watching her shift from confrontational to sympathetic, watching her weave a narrative in real time that she had no way of knowing was true, watching the officer's skepticism slowly morph into uncertainty, Marcus understood the problem with his approach. Laws were only as useful as people's willingness to enforce them against someone charming enough to confuse the issue. The officer, in the end, told them both to work it out between themselves. Corinne didn't leave that day. She swam for exactly 1 hour, then packed up her things with theatrical slowness, smiled at the officer, and left. But not before catching Marcus's eye and giving him a small, private smile that said, without words, "You're not going to win this." What happened next was worse than the pool invasions because it moved beyond Marcus's property and into his community, into the narrative that circulated about him. Corinne, it turned out, was exceptionally good at controlling the story. She spoke to neighbors, not just in his immediate vicinity, but the whole block. She explained with genuine-seeming regret that she'd been given permission by the Hendersons to use community pool amenities, and that the neighbor, and here she gestured toward Marcus's house with a sad smile, had become increasingly hostile and aggressive about it. She'd mentioned very casually how he'd threatened her, how he'd yelled at her children, how he'd prevented her from leaving one afternoon. None of it was true. All of it was exactly true enough to plant doubt. One neighbor, a woman named Dorothy who lived 2 doors down, called Marcus directly. "I just wanted to hear your side," she said gently. "Corinne mentioned some issues, and I think it's important to understand the full picture before making judgments." "What did she say?" Marcus asked, already knowing the answer would sicken him. "That you've been very aggressive about stopping her from using the pool, and that you've been targeting her personally. She seemed quite upset. I felt I should check with you." "She's trespassing on my property," Marcus said flatly. "I've served her legal notice. She's ignoring it. That's not aggression. That's maintaining boundaries." Of course, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." Dorothy sounded unconvinced. "It's a shame when neighbors can't get along." After that call, Marcus noticed the dynamics shift. People he'd thought of as friendly, not friends exactly, but cordial neighbors, began treating him differently. There were no more waves from the woman across the street. The couple who jogged past in the mornings started crossing to the other side of the sidewalk. Corinne came back to the pool in mid-August, and this time she brought someone with her. A man in a polo shirt with a camera, someone who clearly represented the rental property management company. Marcus went out, jaw clenched. "Mr. Chen," Corinne said sweetly, "this is Derek from the property management company for the Hendersons. I wanted to discuss the situation with you directly, with a mediator." Derek was professional and unhappy. "We've received complaints from our guests that they're unable to access amenities that were promised to them as part of the rental agreement," he said carefully. "We've also received some concerns about your behavior from Ms. Corinne here, who reports feeling harassed." "She's trespassing on my property," Marcus said. "On property adjacent to the rental," Derek corrected. "The rental listing does mention access to neighboring amenities. Our renters are paying a premium based in part on those amenities." "They're my property. You have no right to offer them." "We understand your position. However, our legal team suggests that this might be a situation where neighboring properties sometimes share recreational facilities, and preventing that access might violate local community property statutes." Marcus felt his grip on the situation slipping. He knew Derek was lying or at least stretching the truth, but Derek was also representing money, and money meant lawyers, and lawyers meant time and expense. Corinne watched him with cat-like satisfaction as Derek spoke. "The solution we'd like to propose," Derek continued, "is that the renters have access to your pool on certain days and times, perhaps Saturdays and Wednesdays, afternoons, let's say 3 to 6. "No, Mr. Chen. No, absolutely not. This is my property, my pool. I don't share it. There's nothing to negotiate." Corinne interjected sweetly. "You know, if you're worried about liability, we could sign a waiver. We could have insurance. We just want a place to swim. There's no reason this has to be adversarial." The way she said it, with such reasonable concern, such apparent willingness to compromise, made Marcus's skin crawl because he recognized it for what it was. A performance designed to make him look unreasonable if he continued to refuse. Derek left that afternoon, but not before assuring Corinne that the property management company would look into the situation further. The implication was clear. This wasn't over, and Marcus might find himself dealing with lawyers anyway, just with more expensive ones. That night, Marcus sat by his pool which he'd paid for, which he'd envisioned as his private sanctuary, and felt something shift inside him. He'd been playing this correctly. He'd gotten lawyers, filed notices, documented everything, involved the authorities. He'd done everything by the book. The book, he was beginning to understand, was written by people who assumed everyone else was playing the same game. Karen wasn't playing by the book. She was playing to win, and she was willing to blur every line, exploit every ambiguity, manipulate every relationship to do it. She was counting on him to remain reasonable while she dismantled his peace of mind piece by piece. He called Patricia the next morning. "We need to escalate," he said. Patricia, to her credit, didn't ask what that meant. "I'm listening. I want to press charges, trespassing, harassment, whatever we have. I want her to face consequences for ignoring the notice." "We can try," Patricia said carefully. "But you understand that small claims trespassing is difficult to prosecute, especially when there's this gray area about the rental arrangement. And harassment is." "I know it's difficult. I don't care. I want to make her regret this. I want her to understand that there's a cost to what she's doing." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Let me make some calls, but Marcus, I need you to understand something. Legal escalation is going to be expensive, time-consuming, and it might not work. And win or lose, it's going to consume you. Once you go down this road, there's no going back to neighbors who don't talk." "We already aren't neighbors who don't talk. She's made sure of that." He heard Patricia sigh. "I'll call you back." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus's life became a meticulously documented chronicle of violations. He printed everything, every text message, every photograph, every note about timing. He compiled it into a formal complaint and submitted it to the local police department, requesting that a formal trespass citation be issued. The police department, showing more backbone than Marcus had hoped, agreed to issue a citation. A date was set for Karen to be officially notified. That same week, Derek from the property management company sent a letter stating that because of the ongoing dispute about amenities access, the Hendersons' rental listing would be modified to remove mention of neighboring pools. And furthermore, the renters would be encouraged to use only the Henderson property pool. Karen didn't come to the pool for 6 days. Marcus didn't see the white Range Rover. He didn't hear her voice across the gate. The silence was almost worse than the invasion because it meant she was planning something. The police citation was issued on a Friday. A young officer came to Karen's house. Marcus watched from his front window as the exchange happened, the officer handing her papers, Karen's animated gestures suggesting surprise and indignation. Marcus felt a spike of satisfaction. Finally, something was happening. Finally, there would be real consequences. Then Karen came to his door. He opened it to find her standing on his porch, smiling, holding the citation in one hand and a manila folder in the other. She was dressed carefully, tailored white blouse, pressed khakis, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked like someone's reasonable younger sister, not someone who'd spent 6 weeks systematically violating someone's property rights. "Hi, Marcus," she said, her tone warm and almost apologetic. "Can we talk for a second?" Every instinct screamed at him to close the door. Instead, he found himself stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind him. He didn't want her inside his house. Something about her presence felt like a contamination. "I wanted to talk to you before anything escalates further," Karen said, opening the manila folder. "Because I've done some research, and I think there are some things you should know about yourself." She pulled out a packet of printed papers. "First, I looked into your property taxes," she said conversationally. "The documentation for your pool installation in 2023, and I noticed something interesting. You never pulled a permit for the pool work. The city records are clear, there's no permit on file, which means your pool was installed without proper city approval." Marcus felt a cold hand close around his stomach. "Now, I'm not an expert," Karen continued, "but I've talked to a contractor and he says that's a pretty significant code violation. The pool equipment, the circulation, the electrical, none of that's been inspected by the city, which means technically you shouldn't be using it at all. It's a liability issue." "What are you doing?" Marcus asked quietly. "I'm being honest," Karen said, with the serene confidence of someone holding all the cards. "I'm showing you that if we go to court about trespassing and citations, you're going to have to explain why you're so protective of a pool that you built illegally, which is not a great look. And once the city finds out about the permit issue, they're going to cite you. You'll have to remove the pool, pay fines, probably deal with all sorts of lovely consequences." She held up a second set of papers. I also looked into your property line, she continued. And there's a small discrepancy, about 3 feet, between where your fence is and where it should be according to the official survey, which means, technically, part of your pool deck might actually be encroaching on city property, which is another violation. Marcus's mouth had gone dry. He'd never checked the survey. The fence had been there when he bought the house. And Karen said, with the tone of someone delivering a final gift, I've looked into the covenant restrictions for your neighborhood. It turns out there's a maximum size limit for residential pools. Yours exceeds it by about 400 square feet, which is, well, another violation. She held everything out to him. 3 different ways she'd discovered he was in violation of local code. 3 different angles of attack that would cost him thousands to fix, months to resolve, and in the meantime would subject him to fines and citations. I don't understand, Marcus heard himself say. Why are you telling me this? Because, Karen said gently, I want you to think about what's really worth fighting for here. You can pursue this citation against me, and I can pursue a complaint with the city about your pool violations, and I can probably pursue a civil suit against you for the diminished value of my experience as a renter in the Hendersons' property because I couldn't access the amenities I was promised. She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd spent weeks planning this moment. And you'll lose. On all counts, you'll lose time, money, your peace of mind, and ultimately you'll lose the pool itself because the city will force you to remove it. So you're threatening me, Marcus said. I'm being practical, Karen corrected. I'm showing you the math, and the math says that the easiest solution is to let me use your pool. I'm not asking for much, just access. Just the ability to enjoy something beautiful on nice days, and in exchange I'll keep quiet about the violations and you keep quiet about whatever you think I've done wrong. She was offering him a deal, a devil's bargain dressed up in the language of reasonableness. Or, she continued, you could call my bluff. You could pursue the citation, and I could pursue the complaints, and we could both spend months in court while lawyers get rich and your quality of life gets destroyed. And you'd probably still lose because, well, you're actually the one committing code violations. Marcus looked at the papers in his hands. He knew with absolute certainty that every claim she'd made was at least partially true. He'd never checked permits. He'd never verified property lines. He just trusted that the fence was in the right place and that a residential pool was okay. He'd been sloppy about something he'd invested significantly in. How did you even find this information? He asked. Public records, Karen said. The internet, it's all there if you know where to look. I had some time to research. She said it like she was apologizing for working hard. You hired someone, Marcus said. A property investigator, yes. Very cheap, actually. $75. Amazing what you can find out about someone's property if you spend an afternoon looking. She was still smiling. Marcus felt something break inside him. Not his will, something deeper. Some foundational belief that the world rewarded people for playing by the rules, that legality and morality were connected, that a person could be wronged and seek justice and find it. Karen held all the cards because she'd been willing to get her hands dirty looking for leverage, while he'd been busy staying legal. It was a perfect inversion of everything he'd thought he was doing right. I need to think about this, Marcus said. Take your time, Karen said sweetly. But not too much time. The citation expires in 30 days. After that, my complaints to the city automatically go through unless you withdraw them. So, 30 days, that's my timeline. She turned to leave, then paused at the edge of the porch. Oh, and Marcus, don't try to tell the city about the violations yourself in some preemptive way, because that's just going to make you look worse, like you knew they were violations and tried to hide them. So you're really in a bind, aren't you? She left him standing there, holding a folder full of evidence that she'd done her research, and he'd done none of his. He called Patricia and read her the allegations. Patricia listened, then asked to see the documents. He scanned them and emailed them over. She called back 90 minutes later. The pool permit issue is real, Patricia said without preamble. The property line discrepancy exists but is minor, doesn't actually affect much. The size violation is real but not egregiously so, However, filing a complaint about all 3 with the city could result in citations. The city could order you to reduce the pool size, which would cost money. They could levy fines. It's not the worst-case scenario, but it's not nothing. Patricia paused. I looked up your property records. The pool was installed in 2023. That means it's only been in violation for a couple of years, which is actually better than if it had been installed 10 or 15 years ago. So what do I do? Honestly, you have three options, Patricia said. 1. Pursue the citation against her, knowing that she'll retaliate with city complaints and probably a civil suit. That could get expensive and ugly. 2. Withdraw the citation and accept that she's now won access to your pool, which means you've given up your sanctuary for the sake of avoiding liability issues. 3. We go to the city proactively, you file for a variance or work out a settlement with code enforcement. You might face some fines, but you might also shut down her ability to use the violations against you as leverage. She'd still have the information, Marcus said. She would, but she'd have less ability to weaponize it if you've already dealt with it. Marcus sat with that for a long time. Every option felt like a loss. He was going to pay money, invest time, and submit to humiliation regardless of which path he chose. I need to think, he said. He didn't call Patricia back for 3 days. Instead, he started researching. He read through online forums about property code violations. He looked at his original property survey. He called a civil engineer who reviewed the fence line and told him that the discrepancy was exactly what Karen had said, minor but technically real. He was, in fact, technically in violation of code. Karen had found the crack in his foundation and was pressing. On the 4th day, Marcus made a decision. He was going to call Karen. He was going to negotiate. He was going to find out exactly what she wanted and possibly give it to her, because the alternative was too expensive, too public, too destructive to his life. He scrolled through the contact information she'd provided in various cease and desist letters and found her number. His hands actually shook as he dialed. She answered on the 2nd ring. Marcus, she said like she'd been expecting him. I was wondering when you'd call. I want to negotiate, he said flatly. Tell me what you actually want. I want what I've wanted all along, Karen said. Access to the pool, reasonable access, let's say Wednesdays and Saturdays afternoons 3 to 6 p.m., and I want you to withdraw the citation and the trespass complaint. And if I don't, then I file complaints with the City Code Enforcement Office about the pool permit, property line, and size violations. And I file a civil suit against you for the diminished amenity access during the rental period that resulted in negative reviews and loss of rental income. And you spend the next 6 to 12 months in litigation while code enforcement investigates your property. She said it matter-of-factly, like they were discussing weather. That's extortion, Marcus said. That's leverage, Karen corrected. Extortion would be if I was threatening to do something illegal, but filing code violations and pursuing civil remedies for damages are both completely legal. So what you have is a person using legal tools to persuade you to make reasonable accommodations. Call it what you want, but the law calls it a negotiating position. Marcus wanted to reach through the phone and strangle her. Instead, he heard himself say, "Let me think about it." You have 26 days, Karen said. Tick-tock. He hung up and sat in the silence of his house. In the house he'd spent a decade saving for, in the house that was supposed to be his sanctuary, and he felt the weight of his powerlessness. He had all the law on his side. She was trespassing. She was violating code. She was blackmailing him. And none of it mattered because she was willing to break the rules to get what she wanted while he was still trying to play within the boundaries of a game that wasn't fair. That night, Marcus did something he hadn't done since high school. He got drunk. He sat by the pool, his illegal pool, his beautiful pool, his expensive pool that was becoming the source of all his misery, and he drank whiskey neat and tried to understand where exactly his life had become this small. When his choices had narrowed down to lose your pool, lose your peace, or let her win. All three options were losses. His phone buzzed. A text from Patricia, "Call me when you're ready." But he didn't call. Instead, he sat in the dark and he watched the pool lights reflect off the water, and he thought about Karen's confidence, her certainty that she would win. Something crystallized inside him in the dark. Not clarity exactly, but a different kind of decision. Not to give up and not to back down, but to change the rules of the game entirely. If Karen was willing to weaponize information, if she was willing to manipulate systems and relationships to get what she wanted, if she decided that the cost of decency was less than the benefit of winning, then maybe the problem wasn't that he needed to be more legal. Maybe the problem was that being legal wasn't enough. On the 8th day of his deadline, Marcus received an email from the property management company for the Hendersons. They were changing management firms. It was a standard notice, impersonal, brief, but it came with a forwarding address for the new company and a copy of the Hendersons' new rental agreement. Marcus read it carefully, then called the new management firm and asked to speak to the property manager assigned to the Henderson house. When she answered, he said, "I need to report an issue with a guest." He told her in careful, documented detail everything that had happened: the unauthorized access, the repeated trespassing, the manipulation of the neighbor consent agreement, the violation of the cease and desist notice, the threatening behavior. He was calm and methodical, and he provided dates and photographs and documentation for everything. The property manager's tone shifted from helpful to alarmed as she realized the scope of the problem. This is serious," she said. "The previous management company never documented any of this." "Apparently not," Marcus said. "I have all the documentation if you'd like to see it." "We'll need it," the property manager said. "And we'll need to reach out to the renters, the Hendersons, and let them know about the liability exposure. If their guest is trespassing on neighboring property and has been warned multiple times, and the rental company failed to prevent it, there could be liability issues for them if something happens." Marcus felt a small spark of something. Not satisfaction, not yet, but the beginning of it. "Actually," he continued, "I've filed a trespass notice, and the individual violated it multiple times. I've also filed a trespass citation with the police. I just wanted to make sure the property management company was aware of the situation in case there are liability issues they need to address." "Oh my God," the property manager said. "Yes, thank you for letting us know. We'll be contacting the renters today." After he hung up, Marcus called the police non-emergency line and confirmed that the citation against Karen was still active. Then he called Patricia. "I'm not withdrawing the citation," he said without preamble. "And I'm going to be filing a formal harassment complaint as well. I want to pursue this." "Okay," Patricia said, and there was something in her tone, respect, maybe, or recognition that he'd made a decision. "Understand that she's going to retaliate with the code violations. Then we file the variance application with the city before she files her complaints. I'll deal with the code violations, but I'm not backing down." "All right," Patricia said. "I'll set things in motion." Marcus hung up and sat in the silence of his house. He'd made his choice. Not the smart choice, probably not the practical choice, but the choice where he didn't lie down and let someone else determine the boundaries of his property and his peace. The cycle that followed over the next 2 weeks was a strange inversion of the previous months. Karen didn't come back to the pool. Her white Range Rover disappeared from the street. The silence was almost eerie, and Marcus found himself waiting for the retaliation he knew was coming. It came in the form of a letter from a law firm, delivered on a Tuesday morning by certified mail. The letter, on behalf of Karen, hereinafter referred to as the claimant, outlined her lawsuit against Marcus for damages resulting from diminished rental value. The Hendersons, the letter stated, had received multiple negative reviews due to guests being unable to access the promised communal amenities. Karen had documented approximately 15 days of pool usage that was interfered with by the homeowner's hostile and aggressive actions, which she calculated as causing approximately $3,200 in lost value during her stay. It was a number chosen carefully, high enough to be threatening, low enough to potentially fall within small claims jurisdiction where he couldn't have a lawyer. Patricia, when he called her, actually laughed, which was somehow reassuring. "She's panicking," Patricia said. "This lawsuit is going to be dismissed on arrival. She can't claim damages for not being allowed to commit trespass, but it's a nuisance lawsuit designed to create more hassle for you." "How do I respond?" "You don't, not directly. I'll file the initial response and we'll let it play out in court. But Marcus, this is good. This means she's out of moves. She's thrown her legal Hail Mary and it's not going to land." The same day the lawsuit letter arrived, Marcus received an email from the City Code Enforcement Office. An inspector would be coming on Friday to evaluate the pool and assess the reported violations. He called the city proactively, explained the situation, and requested a meeting with code enforcement to discuss variances. It was a strategic move. By admitting the violations and requesting an official path to remediation, He was acknowledging the problem while signaling that he was taking it seriously. The city, somewhat surprisingly, was receptive. Code enforcement agreed to a meeting where they would assess whether variances were possible or whether the pool would need modifications. That meeting happened on Thursday. Marcus met with the inspector, a woman named Maria Chen, no relation though she joked about it, who spent an hour measuring his pool, checking the property lines, reviewing the original installation permits. She was professional and thorough, and her assessment was relatively straightforward. The pool size exceeded the maximum by 400 square feet, which was significant but not catastrophic. The property line issue was minor and could be addressed with a survey update. The permit issue was the real problem, but given that the pool had been installed by a licensed contractor and hadn't caused any documented issues, the city could potentially grandfather it in with a variance application. "You'll need to file the variance," Maria said, "and you'll probably face a small fine for the initial violation, but it's not the worst I've seen." "How much for the fine?" Marcus asked. "Depends on the age of the violation. Probably in the $500 $500 range, and variance applications are $250 $500, depending on complexity." Marcus nodded. It was manageable. It was going to cost him money, but it wasn't catastrophic. "Why are you doing this?" Maria asked as she packed up her equipment. "The violation was already there. No one would have known if you hadn't contacted us." "Someone was going to use the violations as leverage to pressure me into letting her trespass on my property," Marcus said. "I'm not letting that work." Maria gave him an approving nod. "Good for you. Too many people just give in to that kind of pressure." Marcus filed the variance application the next Monday. He also received a notice that his trespass citation against Karen had been formally documented and was scheduled for a court hearing on September 15th. And then came the silence. It lasted for 10 days. Marcus went to work, came home, sat by his pool, and waited for the next move. Karen didn't contact him. No new notices arrived. The lawsuit threat seemed to have dissipated into nothing. On September 12th, 3 days before the court date, Patricia called him. "She wants to talk," Patricia said. "Her lawyer has reached out to me. They're requesting a settlement discussion before the court date." Marcus's first instinct was anger. She destroyed his summer, violated his boundaries, threatened him, and now she wanted to negotiate after realizing she had no actual leverage. But he also understood that this was, in fact, his moment of actual power. "What does she want?" he asked. "To discuss terms," Patricia said. "I think what's happened here is that she's realized her lawsuit isn't going anywhere. The property management company has likely told the Hendersons about the situation, which has probably affected her living situation, and she's got a court date for trespassing where she has no legal defense. So now she wants to make a deal." "Tell her I'll meet," Marcus said, "but not with lawyers. I want to talk to her directly." Patricia was quiet. "Are you sure about that?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I want to look her in the eye while we settle this." They met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, on a Friday afternoon. Karen was already there when Marcus arrived, sitting in a corner booth, looking smaller than he remembered. She was dressed down compared to her pool days, jeans, a simple sweater, her hair loose. She'd done her makeup carefully, though in a way that emphasized her eyes, which was a version of manipulation he recognized, but decided not to call out. She stood when he approached, offering a smile that had less confidence in it than before. "Hi," she said quietly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." They sat across from each other. Marcus ordered coffee. Karen had a cup in front of her already untouched. "I want to apologize," Karen said without preamble. "I handled this badly. I got defensive about being told no, and I made it worse instead of better." Marcus waited. This seemed like the opening move in a negotiation, and he wasn't going to make it easy for her. "The thing is," Karen continued, picking at the edge of her cup, "I grew up in a family where my brother always got what he wanted, and I had to fight for everything. I was used to pushing to not accepting no, and when you said no to the pool, something in me just refused to accept it. It became about winning instead of about the pool itself." She looked up at him, and her eyes were sincere, or seemed to be. "I've learned a lot about myself in the past few weeks, about how manipulative I can be when I feel like I've been wronged, and I'm genuinely sorry, for the trespassing, for the research on your property violations, for all of it." Marcus heard the apology, and he believed on some level that she meant it. But he also heard the narrative she was constructing, one where she was self-aware and working on herself, one where he could feel magnanimous about accepting her apology. "I'm dropping the lawsuit," she continued. "It was a stupid move, and I know it won't land. My lawyer told me so, but I wanted you to know it's being withdrawn." "Okay," Marcus said. "And I'm willing to make this right," Karen said. "I can pay you for any damages you incurred. I know you hired a lawyer, spent time on this. I can compensate you for that. Just tell me what you're thinking." This was where the negotiation would happen, Marcus understood. This was where he could extract some value from the situation, some recompense that would at least make the invasion cost her something. He could ask for money. He could ask for a formal written apology. He could ask for her to publicly admit to the other renters that she'd been trespassing. Instead, he said, "I want you to withdraw any support or communication with the property management company about my property. I want you to tell the Hendersons that you misrepresented the rental agreement to them, and I want you to stop." "Stop what?" Karen asked. "The behavior," Marcus said. "The entitlement, the assumption that other people's property is yours to use, the manipulation when you don't get your way. I want you to actually change, not just apologize." Karen looked surprised, then something that might have been respect flickered across her face. "That's a lot to ask," she said quietly. "I know, but that's what I want." She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." They sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop hummed around them, the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, the background noise of ordinary life continuing. "Why did you let me talk to you?" Karen asked. "Your lawyer probably told you not to." "She did," Marcus said, "but I wanted to understand you. I wanted to know if you actually believed on some level that you had a right to my pool or if you were just testing my boundaries." "I wanted what everyone wants," Karen said quietly. "To get away with something, to take something nice without paying for it. Everyone does it in little ways, right? Using the office printer for personal stuff, stealing napkins from restaurants. I just took it further than most people would." Marcus had to acknowledge that there was truth in that. He'd bent rules before. He'd taken small things that didn't belong to him. The difference was scale and intent, and whether you stopped when someone said no. "Court date is Tuesday," Marcus said. "I'm going to ask them to dismiss the citation if you agree to terms. You don't come to the property, you don't contact me, and if you're ever in the Hendersons' rental again, you follow the exact same rules as any other guest." "What if I violate that?" Corinne asked. "Then we go back to court and I press charges for trespassing, and you'll have a criminal record." Marcus said it matter-of-factly. "I'm not doing this to be nice. I'm doing this to give you one chance to choose differently. After that, there's no mercy." Corinne nodded slowly. "Okay, I accept those terms." They didn't shake hands or hug. There was no moment of reconciliation or closure. Corinne finished her cold coffee, Marcus finished his hot one, and they left the coffee shop separately. Marcus didn't watch her leave. He just sat for another moment in the booth they'd occupied, feeling the weight lift slightly from his shoulders.